This is the xTool M1 Ultra, and this might just be the machine you want to get if you are setting up a craft room because it can do a lot of stuff. You can laser engrave, you can laser cut, you can cut paper with a tiny knife, or leather with a bigger knife, or fabric with a circular knife. Or maybe you want to emboss directly onto paper. Oh, and also it's a color printer. So I have checked out a lot of machines from xTool in the past, and actually I've done a review of their previous M1 machine, which was a combination laser cutter / engraver, as well as a vinyl cutter. So it's basically like a Cricut plus a laser all smashed together. Well, the Ultra definitely steps that up in terms of functionality. xTool has kind of revamped their product line over the past year. They used to be really big with these like big laser cutters that were completely open air, so there was no enclosure whatsoever. And then at some point last year, they introduced the S1, which was their fully enclosed laser cutter and engraver, and it was basically in a form factor really similar to this. And they have extended that over into the M1 line, which is really nice because you can see pretty much the entire work area that you're working with. Now, before we jump into the functionality, let's talk about the machine itself. From what I can tell, the internals are mostly metal, and then you have this hard plastic enclosure that also includes this lid. But this right here is where it gets interesting, because this is actually two different modules, and the one on the right is actually interchangeable. And this is the printer module that I have in there right now. But there's actually a couple other modules that you can drop in, including the laser. But I want to talk about the carriage to start off, because this is where you can drop in your blade tools. They have a larger blade right here, and I've used this to cut things like leather or simple cuts on paper. And then they've also got this nice rotary blade tool, and this is gonna be really good if you're doing stuff like fabric. And then they have an embosser tool, which is basically like a really fat pointed end that you can push into paper or leather or other material to have like that embossed effect. And these are pretty easy to use. So let's say I wanted to use my blade, or to do it when you're not looking at it, but it pops in, it's magnetic, and then this clamps down on the outside, and then that's locked into place. And I believe the software can actually tell which tool you have installed. And then to put this into the machine, there's a little dovetail on the back, and then you lock it into place. And this has a cover that goes right on top to keep everything clean and protected. And then these two tools go in just the same way. And I did some examples with the embossing and the cutting that you can see going right now. And it does a great job. And then if you are familiar with a Cricut or a vinyl cutter, then you might be familiar with mats like these. These are basically like mats that are tacky on both sides, so that when you put paper or material down, kind of locks it into place. Because unlike a laser, when you're dragging a knife across it, your material can move. So you want it to stick into place. And they have a couple different ones that you can use. There's the blue one right there that is more for light material. And then you've got a pink one that is a little bit more sticky that you're gonna use for like cloth and stuff like that. Now, before we get into the other two modules, you'll also notice there is this other guy that is permanently attached to this unit. So if I took this one out, just so we can focus on it, you can see we have another spot where we can drop in tools. And one of the tools you can use is a fine point blade. It just drops in like this. And that is what I used to cut out this like crazy jellyfish out of some cardstock. But because it was a lot more intricate, I had to use a smaller blade, and that's what you're gonna use that side for. Now, in addition to that, and this is something you probably have seen with other machines like this before, you can also use a pen or pencil just by dropping it in. And to use it, they give you this little like holder where this will drop in, and then it locks into place. Just like with the other ones, you've got an enclosure that you can put it on right there. So this basically turns into a plotter machine in addition to everything else. And one of the things I tested out with this was actually doing text. But to do text with like a pen, usually you need to use like a single stroke font. And they actually have a few of those in there that you can set specifically to use with a pen. And so you can see some of the examples happening right now. And that is what I use to write jellyfish with the pen right there. So having that pen functionality is really cool. Now, I'm pretty sure you can basically use whatever pen or pencil you want, but they provide you a set of different colors, which comes right out of the box, which is super handy as well. Now, what's nice about that is you can use this in conjunction with these other tools. So if you did want to use the plotter and then you wanted to cut something out with some of the other blades, you would just drop this right back in. And then inside of the software, you can find what artwork you want to do with both tools, or you can have something pretty much set up all the time. Now, the function that xTool is probably most known for is the laser. And in some of their materials, I saw it mentioned that they also have a 20 watt. So I would imagine because this is so modular, you'll have some options for some different wattages depending on what you're doing. Again, this attaches the exact same way as the other. All the connections are in the back. This locks into place. And then one thing that happens when you jump into the laser is your material thickness might change, because if you are cutting something out, they provide this grid right here with these guys that actually can move around, but that can drop down. You can put your wood on top of that and then cut stuff out. But how thick of something you're cutting out might change. And so you can autofocus this module as well. And all that's built directly inside of the software. There's a little spring-loaded pin here on the bottom that lets it set how far down it's gonna go. Now, when we get into the laser, some of the safety features definitely come into play. First, the one we've already talked about is this enclosure, which helps block the harmful light that is coming from this diode laser. But as you're using the laser, you're also going to make smoke and fumes. And if I flip this around to the back, you can see we do have a vent right there, but there's not a fan built into the machine because you get this guy, which snaps into place like that, which has a fan built into it as well as a filter. And then you can exhaust this either into another air filter unit or out your window. They actually found that the filter they had built in did a pretty good job just for like the really simple engraved jobs that I did. But if you are gonna use the laser, you definitely wanna be in a well-ventilated area. Now, I haven't been able to test it, but I'm pretty sure their bigger air filter that you would use with their xTool S1 would work fine with this. Now, I thought it was a little bit strange that this was an additional unit, but I could totally see it if you're coming at it from the crafting space, because this does make it more bulky on the back. And if primarily you're gonna be using like the vinyl cutter or the plotter or even the printer, which we still need to talk about, you really don't need exhaust for that. So it definitely saves some bulk on the back end. And there is an electrical connection right here on the back. So this will only run when you're using that laser module, and they can turn it on and turn it off. So it's just not as loud all the time. And then a few other safety features they brought over from the S1 is their tilt, like motion detection, which is really sensitive. I actually kind of moved the machine a few times when I was cutting stuff, and it cuts power to the laser really quick. And there's actually sensors in the lid, so you can only run this when this is fully closed, and you have to be physically next to the machine to start your cut or engrave. And that's with pretty much any process you're gonna do. You're gonna send it to the machine, you can hit it right there, and you're gonna be good to go. And they also have these like half dome clear sensors. There's one right here, and then two on the back that I believe are their fire sensors. And they provide like a fire suppression system that you can plug into the back. So when something is detected, it's able to put it out really quick. But that brings me to one limitation I am seeing with this machine. From the best that I can tell, there's no integrated air assist with this. And all the air assist is like a stream of air that is coming out around where your laser beam is to help put out any flames or flare-ups. This is especially used when you're doing cutting. A lot of times you don't even need an air assist if you're doing engraving, because it can kind of interfere with the laser beam, so the quality isn't quite as good. Now, I think they will provide it because there is a air connection on the back, and I can see tubing on the inside, but specifically for the 10 watt module, I'm not seeing a spot where that tube would connect. And I'm actually recording this before this is officially released, so if that changes, I'll let you know down in the comments. Now, there is a fan on the top, but I believe that is just for cooling the laser itself. It also has a big heat sink at the bottom to keep this relatively cool so it can operate for long periods of time. Now, one feature they have brought over from the laser that you can use with pretty much anything is their positioning system, because there is a red laser dot that will trace the boundary of whatever you're about to engrave or cut. And I believe that is actually attached to this unit, because you can use the framing function even when you're not using the laser module itself. Which brings me to one of the other things I kind of wish they would fix, is that this doesn't like lock into place. Now they've got markings and grids on the bottom, so you kind of know where to place this, but there's nothing that completely locks it into place. So if you're gonna be doing something over and over and over again, and you have like a jig set up to where you know exactly where to place something, that could still adjust. So still need to run that framing function as a result. This also doesn't have a camera, and that is what the xTool P2 does have included, but they have come out with a workaround where you can take a picture of what you have inside of there, and they have a few alignment dots on the side that will basically stretch your picture into the software, and then you can line it up from there. But that framing function with the laser, it's super easy to run as well. Oh, and one last thing with the laser, as I'm taking this out, there are actually screws on the bottom of this which means that you can actually remove this bottom plate. And you can see here are the markings that I was talking about. But because of that, the bottom is fully exposed, meaning you could put this directly on a bigger piece of material. So say I wanted to laser engrave this table that I'm at right here, you can by removing the bottom. All right, now for the last module, and this is going to be the first for me. I currently haven't reviewed a machine that has a inkjet printer in it, and that is what this module is right here. You can see that if I take this off right here, this is magnetic, but that is where the ink is going to come out, and this pops out like that. And this is more like your traditional ink cartridge, but it goes in pretty easy. Everything locks down into place. And then you've got this cover that uses magnets to attach, and they do that to help keep the ink from drying out. And then this just attaches like everything else on the side, locks into place. And this is the only one that you actually have to connect with a wire. And they've got a little tray that slides into the base that basically has like a ton of sheets of paper. And so before this starts, this will run over, push down to kind of clear any of the ink that's on there. And then also this little guy that we talked about earlier slides into place. And that's kind of handy because also at the end of whatever you're printing, the laser head will run over to this. And because it's magnets, it'll snap back up into place. So like, even if you forget to put it back, as long as it's in this spot and it's locked into place, you'll be good to go. Now, in terms of cutting performance for the laser, it works great, and laser engraving works like you would expect it to. But then for the printer and its performance, I don't have something to compare it to directly other than like an actual like full inkjet printer. This is definitely a little bit different just in terms of how it works. But one nice element with it that a normal inkjet printer doesn't have is you could also have thicker material. And this module itself can actually zero itself out. So there's a little bit of play here at the bottom. So it will find like the 0 point and then print from there. So even if you're not using paper, maybe it's something thicker like wood, you can do it with this guy too. So would I recommend this machine, and who do I think it's for? In general, I find with xTool, especially after they moved away from their like open design to more fully enclosed machines, they do a really good job. And the software itself is actually pretty easy to use compared to some of the other stuff that's out there. We'll do an example project here in a second, but I think this is actually great for a crafting space because you're getting a great vinyl cutter and laser, and you're also getting the ability to color print all in one machine. So you're basically combining an xTool S1 plus a Cricut plus a color printer all together. So you're gonna save on a lot of space, but because they're also integrated into the same machine, you can mix and match. And I think that's where it's gonna get really interesting to see some of the stuff that folks make. Like even something as simple as this. So having the pen write jellyfish, you can do all this directly inside of the machine. And then something I've never really seen before is you could color print an image on like say a piece of wood and then cut it out with the laser all within one machine. Now, one thing I was a little bit nervous with is when you remove these modules, it's pretty easy to move the carriage back and forth, but there's a red dot inside of the software that's showing you exactly the position of the red like crosshair that this creates. So I believe they're using closed loop motors. Basically, this means there's feedback whenever you move this, it kind of knows where you move it to. So even if you were say switching out the inkjet module with the laser module and you wind up bumping it a little bit, it's still gonna be fine because it's gonna know exactly where it's gonna go. Okay, so we are going to do an example. All right, so we're actually gonna be doing 3 different things. We're gonna be using the laser, we're gonna be using the pen, and we're going to cut it all out from a piece of wood with the laser engraver. Now, because of that, I'm actually gonna show you pretty much all the different setups that you can do for this. Starting with our sticky mat. So I'm gonna go ahead and drop that in here. I'm going to drop in my laser module. And then this guy right here is that pad that I was talking about that slots into a very specific location. That is so that it can pick up this guy, magnetic bottom. So that just goes right here. And then finally, I'm gonna drop in my pin, which is gonna go right over here. All right, then from here, I'm going to power everything on and go ahead and home my machine. So it's just gonna move to the back left. And the software is actually pretty nice. They've been developing it for a while, and you can use it over USB as well as Wi-Fi. I'm gonna go ahead and put in my material. So we're gonna do this piece of wood right here. Then I'm gonna go ahead and set this up real quick. I've got my picture of Baby Yoda. And then I'm gonna use the framing function really fast to make sure that I've got it in the right spot. And you can see that laser crosshair. So we just framed it. It looks like it's just about right. So I'm going to make just like a big rectangle around him that this is gonna be what we actually cut out. And then inside of that, it's just gonna say Grogu. Now for this, we're gonna be using our pen tool. So I want to make sure and use a font that will work for that. So you can actually select it right here. You can see it sets it to a single line. So we're gonna be good to go. I am going to define this one as my drawing pen. And then in here you can set like the pressure and all that kind of stuff. And they actually have some built-in settings for a lot of the stuff. And then for this one, it's already set to the ink module. And the only thing that you can set with this is just like the intensity, which I think is just like how hard it's actually pushing into the material. So we're gonna go with 65. And then the last one is going to be this, which is already with our laser module. I'm gonna make sure that's set to cut. But I actually need to run this at the end, and I'm gonna need to put in my grid to get it off of the ground. So I just wanna make sure I don't have this set to output. So the only thing it's gonna do is the Grogu as well as the color print. Kind of get a preview of what it's gonna do. Looks like it is going to print first, and it's gonna come back and draw. Start 1 of 2. And you can see it's giving me an error saying that you need to make sure this is locked down. So that is really handy, which it basically won't let you start if you do have some stuff messed up. And I've done that a bunch of times. And you can see it's gonna go in and actually measure the distance. So it's dropping down. It's gonna come up slightly. So now it knows how far to go. It's gonna send the file over. At this point, we can start. And before it starts, it's gonna run over to this like paper pad on the side. Press down to kind of clear any of like the ink blots or whatever to get it good to go. Now the printing is like relatively quick. There's 3 different colors inside of it that comes out in 3 different spots. So it basically just does like 3 color passes to give you the full color image. And you can see, even though this is relatively big, it's going through the process pretty quick. This is gonna go back over. It's gonna pick up the plate. That was that magnetic snap. And then rehome. And so then it tells me on the computer that task is done. If I want to go ahead and start the next one. Again, I got to hit the button to actually start it. And now we're going to use the pen. All right, so we've got our first 2 steps done. And so at this point, I can set this up to use the laser. Now this is where I do wish that I could have some type of indexing, because I got to take this out to put in my other grid. And that's because the best that I can tell, you can't use the ink with it raised up like this. There's not enough space to do it. But I'm switching this out, dropping in the laser. And at this point, I'm just gonna have to use the framing function to get everything aligned exactly the way I want. And because we're using the laser, I'm gonna go ahead and attach this guy. And then over in the software, I'm just gonna select these so I don't output them. And then the framing, the rectangle I am. And I do wanna set my power as well as my speed on this guy, say 8, and then we'll actually do 2 passes just in case. All right, now I wanna see if I've got this set up in the right spot. So this is where if you did have it completely indexed, this would be a little bit easier. So I'm now gonna have to push this over. This also could be where if you use the camera, that could be a little bit more handy as well. All right, we're gonna say that's close enough for what we're trying to do. Now I'm going to send it. It's gonna measure the distance, so it's gonna use the little pin on the side to autofocus it. And then one feature I just turned on in the settings is you can actually lower it by 1 millimeter every time it does a cutting pass. And so that is what I did. So if you're using thicker material, it can slowly step itself down because the focus point can definitely change with the thickness of your material. Now the fan turned on, so it's probably gotten a lot louder in here, but you can see that we are cutting that directly out. All right, it's gonna let that fan run for a sec. All right, I could definitely play with the settings a little bit more to get this to pop out a little bit cleaner. Now I definitely needed to adjust my settings on the cut because I had to force this piece out. That was just a user error. But you can see this was like a 3-step process. So really cool, you can do all of that directly inside of a single machine. And maybe you don't need the laser printer or the plotter or any of the blades, you just need the laser itself. In that case, you should check out the xTool S1 or the xTool P2, and we're gonna jump into those reviews right now. All right, until next time, go make or break something in your shop. See you guys.